All right, here we are. Welcome, Emilia. Thank you so much for joining me for my podcast.
Thank you
Um,
so much, Laura. Thanks for having me and thanks for inviting me on. I appreciate it. It's good to see you.
Likewise. Could we start off? Could you just introduce yourself to the listeners and the Birchfield Highlands Project and what it is?
Of course, I'd be delighted. I'm Emilia Leese, and I'm one of the owners of what we call Birchfield Highlands Rewilding um, in the Highlands of Scotland, just south of Loch Ness. I am also the author of a book called Think Like a Vegan, which is now out in paperback, and it's out in. You can get it from any bookshop, and in Germany, I believe there's one. There's the English language bookshops that carry it, or that you can get it from, and the Rewilding Project is something that my husband and I started in 2017 after being inspired by a person whose name is Alan Watson Featherstone. He's the founder of a charity called Trees for Life. And initially, it was basically just him, and he was replanting the Caledonian forest in Scotland. And so we listened to one of his speeches. We went to a talk actually that he gave, and we were inspired by that and said, "Oh, well, why don't we try doing something like that?" So, and the talk was a few years before 2017. I don't remember the date exactly, but a few years before. And then in 2017, we found Birchfield, and we initially started with the idea of simply replanting some trees and like Scots pines instead of the Sitka spruce that is currently on the site. But then it sort of evolved from there because we were working with some other people involved in different aspects of rewilding, and we said, well, we have this land. It's about 100 acres. So in terms of Scotland, it's big for us, certainly, but in terms of Scotland, and it is relatively small. And we said, hey, we've got this, we're going to plant some trees. Do you think there's anything else interesting that we could do? And there were people involved there who were from the University of Cumbria, from a company called ACOM, which is a large sort of infrastructure consultancy. Then we had people from the NGO called the Lifescape Project. And they all said, "Gosh, yeah, we have different ideas of what we'd like to do. Yeah, we could. Let's work together. We've got different interests and different things that we want to do in terms of rewilding and so forth." So we all sort of started working together in a loose collaboration. It's the best I can call it, and now we also have the Nottingham Trent University also working with us, and it's been really interesting.
Great, thank you. And I think what makes this rewilding project a bit different is that it's a vegan project. So I was wondering what makes it vegan, and how did you have that idea? Maybe share a bit about your vegan journey.
Sure. It's So Roger's my husband, who also owns the site. We are both vegan, and lots of the people involved in the project are vegan. Not everyone. And I mean, in terms of being vegan, for me, it's all about the ethics. So, and it's about not exploiting animals and not exploiting anyone, really. That's my basic that's my sort of basic foundation of life. Don't exploit anyone. It doesn't matter who they are. Don't exploit them. And so so starting from there, and thinking about first, just in terms of food, we ask people to only consume vegan-friendly foods while they're on the site, because lots of times we have people staying on the site and conducting research, conducting different projects, carrying out different projects, and so forth. And so we asked them to do that. And in terms of rewilding, one of the IUCN principles, which we abide by, is to view animals in a holistic way as individuals, not just as species, and to value that. So we do. In Scotland, there's this idea that you have to cull / kill deer in order to manage, and that's not just in Scotland. That is in many places in the world, applicable to any variety of animals that humans have decided need to be managed, quote unquote, even though we have created the problem for them. But anyway, so that's basically, when we first were thinking about the site, and we were working with who was our forest manager. He said, "Oh, well, do you have any?" And he didn't know we were vegan. He said, "Oh, do you have any problems, managing deer and having to cull deer?" And I said, "Oh, well, tell me about that. How does that work?" I said, "Does it actually work? Are the deer, are you able to actually then manage the deer?" He's like, "No, not really." And I said, "Huh." So I said, and I said, "And why is it that we have this problem of deer, do you think?" And he's like, "Well, the forests, we don't have them we don't have the forests, and they were introduced." And I was like, "Oh, I see." So a problem that we created, we ask them to pay the ultimate price, and it also doesn't work. And he's like, "Yeah." And I said, "Yeah, we won't be doing that." He's like, "You're kind of right." And I'm like, "Yeah."
That's great.
And so doing it that way, having him explain to me the reason why it's a little bit not right. But anyway, so we don't kill deer, and if it's a really it's really tricky, because there's one section of the land that has been enclosed in a fence. It's about 50 acres, half of it enclosed in a fence, and there's deer stuck in it. So we're trying to, and when you have deer stuck inside, obviously they're going to eat all the different plants and the saplings and things like that. And the saplings then can't grow, which means then the trees can't grow.
Yeah.
And when you have an obligation, when you have cut trees down, to replant them. Now, we didn't cut the trees down in that section. The previous owners did. And they put the fence around it to keep the deer out. But unfortunately, they actually trapped deer in. Right, exactly. So you have a pressure from the Scottish government to make sure that the trees grow, and that's why they then pressure you to kill the deer, pressure you as a landowner, and that's done more or less. This is a very general conversation. There's specifics, but I don't need to get into that. But there's a pressure to do that.
Yeah.
So we're trying to figure out alternate ways so that we don't have to do that. And there really isn't that many. I don't know of any other rewilding projects that are also thinking about what they need to do not to kill deer, and to try alternative methods, specifically as a goal. But we are doing that, and that's part of our vegan ethics that are being carried through to what we do.
That's great.
So,
it's crazy how there are all of these problems created by humans and other people, and you have to deal with it.
And yes, exactly.
And in the end, it's the deer who have, like you said, they have to pay the ultimate price, and it doesn't even work.
Well,
And it's just,
exactly. It doesn't. That's the trouble. It doesn't even work, and that's a widely acknowledged fact. But irrespective, it doesn't seem to change the behavior, which I don't really understand. If I keep hitting my head against the wall and it hurts, I stop.
Yeah, people just don't think about it. And I mean, hearing about it, I sort of think, but there must be some reason why this won't work, to just take away the fence so the deer aren't trapped. Is that not possible?
Yes. Well, that I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly one of the things that we tried to do. So not we tried to do, we actually did. So we lowered part of the fence, and so the risk is, are more deer going to come in?
Right.
But what we have found, so initially, the deer, we had a camera trap. A camera trap just means a video camera. It's not a trap. Like, you know what I mean? Okay. So we had a camera trap, and initially, I mean, these deer have lived in this 50 acres for a long time. Mm. They were born there, some of them, right? So that's the world that they know. So they would go up to the fence that was lowered. I mean, lowered as in they would then be free to come in and out. And they would just kind of look at it, and then they would like go back in. They would like, oh, that's nice. That's like a new thing. Thanks. Like whatever. And I know, it's so funny. And we're like, they're not interested. But then like one decided, oh, I'm going to jump over. Oh, this jumping over. So then they started jumping over and then jumping back in. So it was a slow, like anything, it's a new thing.
Yeah, you have to explore it.
And you have to explore it. And that's what they did. And so now, I mean, we don't have certainty, but we believe, we don't have like 100% scientific certainty, but we have a strong belief that now the deer are mostly going out. They're not spending as much time on the inside, which means that gives the plants that they are browsing inside less. And the outside, you're saying, well, what is outside? Where are you? Where are you located? The outside of this fence, it's not like they are going into an urban area or a suburban area. It's a completely rural area. They're open hills that stretch all the way into the Cairngorms National Park, which is a big mountain range, essentially. And so they are free to go everywhere, in places that are not fenced in.
Right.
So we've done that. And it seems to be working. Do they come back? Yes. Is there a risk that others might come in? Yes, to some extent, but also maybe not, because deer tend to be, they're territorial, but not in the sense of like, like how we understand certain predators to be territorial, like where you only have, one predator per, whatever X number of acres. It's not like that. But basically, if there is a population of deer in one place, and then suddenly that deer population disappears, like they get killed, then the other population that's elsewhere, they come in. They they just fill in that vacuum, or they move around like that. So we believe the deer population that is already there, it's not like there are going to be new ones that come in, because there's already other ones that have occupied that space. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Again, I can't tell you that this is scientific in the sense of here's the evidence, here's the data of 24/7 monitoring, peer reviewed, blah blah blah. I can't tell you that, because that's not how we've done it. For better or worse, that's not how we've done it. Well, for practical reasons, that would be an impossible thing for us to carry out. But if any of your listeners are people who are interested in carrying that out, by all means, get in touch with me and let's see what we can do. But like, there's only so much resources and of a variety of types. So, but anyway, so that's what we've seen, and hopefully we're right about that.
Right. Yeah, I think, I would love to talk more about that. I don't want to take up the whole time of the podcast talking about the deer, but I think it's so interesting because a while back I also informed myself about, if there is like a movement against hunting in Germany. I lived in the UK before too, and I also noticed that there was so much more hunting, and it was all very horrible. And I just wanted to inform myself. And I read a bit about some national parks in different parts of the world where they don't kill deer either. And the interesting thing is that, another big problem that we created is that, humans, they killed all of the big predators that are the natural, they are supposed to manage and protect
Right.
the deer, right?
In a functioning ecosystem, exactly.
Yeah.
In a functioning
That's how
ecosystem,
nature
that's
keeps
how it
itself
works.
balanced.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a problem. And I read about some national parks where they also, they didn't have any big predators anymore, and some of them, what they tried out was just to do nothing, and they just left the deer by itself, and of course the population grew. But over time, it also, it was like a pendulum. It swung back into balance, because the more deer you have, the more survival pressure is on them. There's simply not enough food to sustain an infinite number of deer in a certain area. But you need time for that, and I understand that in your case it wouldn't be possible, because it's precisely about regrowing the forest, and it's not like you have an existing big forest that could sustain a growth of deer over a certain time. Your project is exactly about regrowing trees, and you have cut trees, so I guess that would be too much pressure on the trees, and there's the pressure from the government, of course. But I just think it's so interesting how, the best thing usually seems to leave nature alone and not play God. But with all of these factors, it's sometimes you have to do something.
Exactly. Well, in rewilding, the principal idea is exactly as you said, to leave things alone.
Yeah.
To the extent that is feasible and possible, and so you have to be really careful if you do decide to intervene in whichever way, whether it's planting a tree or not planting a tree or doing this or that, whatever it is. You have to think about, why am I doing this? And to some extent hope for the best, hope that what you're doing isn't detrimental in some way that you learn about 40 years from now, because you also don't want to dictate to an environment and a space what that environment and space is going to be. You have to let that become what it wants, not that it wants, but what it's going to be.
Sure.
But yes, you're absolutely right. The timings, there's lots of different pressures that you have to manage and things like that. But for us, and particularly for me, I am always going to think about, okay, I have intervened in a sentient being's life, and I have to value that, and only in the most extreme cases where I have, then if those, when you take your companion animal to the vet because it's at the end of their life, that's an extreme case, and you do that very, very carefully. And even around that, there's all sorts of ethical issues. But we all navigate these very difficult questions.
Right. Okay. So let's move on.
Yep.
Could you tell us a bit about the history of deforestation in Britain? Because that was also something that, when I lived in the UK, I had it was like a huge culture shock for me, because I started noticing, and at some point I wondered, where are all the trees? Is it just me? And then I looked it up on the internet, and I looked up like the European average of forest cover in the different European countries. The average is 35%, and that's also what we have in Germany, but it's so much less in Britain. I think it's only 10%, right?
That's correct. Yeah, exactly. No, in Britain is the worst in terms of forest cover in the entirety of Europe as a geographic area. In general, it's really low down there. So the history of it. So let's go back to Neolithic times when we collectively as humans changed and had the agricultural revolution, if you will. So when the Neolithic people came to Britain about 10,000 years ago, things started to change. And by the time the Romans arrived in 52 CE, already 50% of the forest cover was gone. So deforestation doesn't just begin in our sort of 20th and 21st century. It begins much before. The ecological problems we have today have accelerated over the 20th and 21st century, but they didn't just show up now. Then things accelerated to some extent, but they really started to pick up in the 1700s and the 1800s in Scotland in particular, when there was lots of additional deforestation and bringing in of sheep instead of the tenant farmers, and kicking out the tenant farmers with the clearances. So lots of sheep obviously browsing freely on hills that will not let much of anything else grow other than certain types of grasses. But even before that, you had colonization and empire building. Where do you think all the wood for all the ships came from? One of the things I always say, and people who have visited Birchfield and heard me speak, colonization happens outward, but happens inward as well. Colonization does not just have negative effects on the outside, but it also has negative effects on the inside in a variety of different ways. And they're just different. So you have that. Lots of wood was used for leather tanning and industry and so on and so forth. So that by the time, and also the big large estates that started to develop in that time frame, people didn't really care about trees. They didn't really think about like, oh, hey, if we cut these big giant oaks, they're going to take another 100 years to grow to a fraction of this size. They just didn't think about that, or they didn't think about it at scale. I mean, of course they knew, but it just wasn't. It wasn't really a concern. So by the time the 1900s come around, I think the forest cover was about 5% or something like that. So now it's a bit better, and there is much more focus on it, and there is a recognition of the forest cover missing in Britain as a whole, and it's especially in comparison to other European nations. And there are lots of people who, there's a fair number of people who are trying to do something about that.
That's good. About time.
It's a something.
Yeah. All right. I'm noticing that we've already almost half an hour, and I wanted to keep it at half an hour, so you have to rush.
Okay.
No, I don't want to rush you, but It's my fault, I think. You stay too long with the deer. But yeah, I could stay with this too, because I think it's really interesting. And, as an archaeologist, I'm so fascinated about how also the ancient cultures, how they interacted with their landscape and what relationship with nature they had. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, we have to continue. The other thing that I thought was really interesting, what you mentioned in the talk of the VCOPE 25 convention, where I heard you talk, was that you mentioned you had a peat bog on your land, and that you were also trying to revive it, to hydrate it. And that's another thing that I think is really interesting. And it's like an important part, I understand, of doing something about climate change and, sort of healing the environment, because that's another thing that people did, that we've done to nature, not just cutting down the trees, but also ruining these bogs and fens that really play a vital role. Maybe you can tell us more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So a peat bog is essentially a very it's a type of wetland, if you will. And basically, there is lots of biodegrading vegetable matter in a peat bog. Lots of water, and obviously, because there's lots of vegetable matter, it's a really fertile place to either plant things or from which to extract fuel. So people used to use peat for fuel, and they still do, and they use peat for fertilizer, and they still do, unfortunately. We didn't realize that we had peat on the site, because in Scotland there's a peat bog map. But the peat bog map doesn't actually contain all the peat bogs that actually exist, because people forgot. Because the degradation has happened over time, they just forgot, and they planted on these places. And that's what happened at our place. The previous owners and in time had planted on the peat bog, and so it became degraded. But with our partners, ACOM, they were doing a land survey, and one of the things that they noticed, they're like, you know what? There's a lot of sphagnum moss here. I wonder if this is peat. So they did a little core sample, and they found that there was peat. And in some places, people who are into peat bogs and stuff, they know that if you have like a meter or 2 meters of peat, it's very exciting. In some places, we have 5 meters of peat, and that's really exciting, because each meter is about 1,000 years. So exactly. So it's a really good thing. So the project that ACOM undertook this past spring was to, because when you're planting trees, you cut ditches in the land so that you have free flowing water, not where you've planted the trees, because you plant them on these little mounds. And then, the water all goes away. But really, the water should be staying, because there shouldn't be all these trees there. Anyway, so you have to dam up where the water is running off so that it starts to permeate throughout, and it starts to stop. So that's the kind of thing that we're trying to do. And we've done that over a particular area. And the change, now I believe they were there, I'm going to say March or April, so maybe about a year ago now. But this summer, so they did it last spring, and then this summer, so a few months later, rather, we were looking around, and we already saw such a massive change, both obviously in the hydration factor, that you saw lots more of the water being pooled rather than running off, but also lots more dragonflies, in a variety of other insects, damselflies, and also you had like newts and frogs, and so that we had never seen in that area before. So even that, so you're talking about like maybe 3 months time, and you already have that big, huge change, which is really exciting. And I should also have said peat bogs are important because they themselves act as a carbon sink. They've
Yeah.
they've been a carbon sink for all that time that that vegetable matter has been decomposing in that space. So when they dry out, all the carbon is that they've trapped in all of that time then dissipates and goes back
Yeah.
out into the atmosphere. And that's why peat bogs are important in two ways, as stores and sinks. And in the opposite, they are a marker. If they are drying out and they're releasing more carbon, that's a problem.
Absolutely. Well, that's really great to hear that.
Yeah,
Sure.
it's really great. It's lovely to see it.
And it also creates a new habitat for, I guess, some endangered species and just biodiversity. So
And biodiversity, yeah, of course.
yeah,
Once you have the amphibians and you have the insects, then you start getting the birds. Then you start getting, the distribution of the mosses tends to increase, and so on and so on. So you create you re-strengthen the biodiversity that was there. You create additional spaces. So that is really important.
absolutely. Well, time for the last question. This was something I also really that resonated with me that you said on your talk. I think it was at the end, and I'm paraphrasing here, but you said something that, we are nature, and it's important that we don't feel separate from it. Um, and I absolutely agree with this. I think, there's a lot of disconnection that people nowadays, especially in the Western world, have. They don't feel like they are part of nature. They like to go for a walk in the park or the forest on the weekend, but most of the time, we spend so much time in our offices or at home, and we feel like we are somehow disconnected from nature. Could you maybe elaborate a bit on that? Why you feel that this is important?
I think so. Yes, your paraphrase is right. We are as much a part of nature as nature is a part of us. It's an indistinguishable continuum, irrespective of whether we are in an urban environment or we are in a what quote natural environment. They're all natural environments in the way that we have created them. So the sort of alienation comes in where we have this fear that nature is and I mean it's a legitimate sort of primordial fear, because yes, of course, the elements can absolutely kill us in 2 seconds. Absolutely. A variety of things out there where a human being as a structure is a relatively fragile, relatively. I mean, we're extremely successful given our distribution in terms of you know uh, uh, how many of us there are versus everyone else. Um, so, but we are so the fear of nature being something that could hurt us, quote, is understandable and probably good to some extent, because it creates a certain respect. But that we think that nature is out there and it's for someone else and that it doesn't matter and it doesn't affect us. It absolutely does, because the quote nature that's happening around the other side of the planet, and that will absolutely affect us. The nature that's happening in Scotland, that will absolutely affect us, because we are living on a planet that is nature. Like, you can't, it's inextricable. This the alienation that we have from it is really it's it's a fake construct that we have bought into, so that then we don't pay attention to things like that, but we only work for amassing capital for the capitalist class. um, and that's part of it. We are no longer attuned, to what is actually happening. But that doesn't mean that we may not be attuned to it, but it doesn't mean that those things aren't happening. They are absolutely happening. And those things, whatever those things are, whether they are on a grand scale like climate catastrophe, or whether they are small things like the little plants and trees that can grow in the cracks in the sidewalks, that will grow in the cracks in the sidewalks, the animals who have adapted and sometimes thrive in our urban environments, even because there are loads of animals who thrive in urban environments. And have created a niche for themselves in that space. So, and we have created niches where we thrive in these environments. But this idea that nature is for someone else, or that nature, quote, nature excludes certain types of people and it's only for certain other types of people, those are all lies, basically. Those are just simply lies. They're just simply lies. And that's, everybody is welcome in nature. Everybody is part of nature. And if someone's uncomfortable, or they've not been out in a big wood or in the mountains, totally get that. But find the nature in your urban environment, in your suburban environment. What does that look like? Is it super organized? So do you feel that it's not so natural because it's like this perfectly manicured garden? Or do you like, things that are a little bit more messy and how they would be in an actual forest? And, to make yourself as possibly acquainted with that as you can, where that's possible. And I believe very much that we should be trying to encourage and put resources and effort into ensuring that everybody has access to that, not just people who have money, not just people who are living in the right places, and so forth. And I mean, that requires a much more systemic solution, of course, like many of the things that we are skirting around, But
yeah, I think that's a perfect way to end, and a nice inspiration to leave for our listeners and for myself too. Hopefully people will be inspired to go outside and explore the nature they can find.
I hope so.
Yes, thank you so much. And I'm wishing you all the best with the project. Thank you.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. It was really nice to talk with you, Laura.
Likewise, thank you.